A quick note before we get started. The episodes you typically hear are edited versions of our 2.5 hour discussions. But for season 1, episode 10, we realized that there just is so much to talk about. It would have been really difficult to edit down our conversation to our 50-minute episode length. So instead, we're trying something new. What we're going to do is we're going to divide our conversation into two parts. Part 1 of episode 10 is going to discuss our theme. And then part 2 will include our sacred reading practice, which this week is Lectio Divina, our blessings, and sparklets. This hopefully will give you plenty of opportunity to listen to the pieces that are of interest to you without feeling completely overwhelmed by the episode length. If you like this, please let us know, and we can maybe continue doing longer episodes divided into two parts that are dropped on the same day. Otherwise, enjoy episode 10.
Hi, my name is Alexis.
And I'm Anna.
And I'm Evelyn.
I'm Victoria.
And I'm Katie.
We are the Marmalade Mermaids. Our flag means death. This week's episode, season 1, episode 10, Wherever You Go, There You Are.
I selected the theme of death. I was this close to picking the theme of grief, like real close. And I feel like I can kind of fudge it a little bit. They're so closely intertwined. Anyway, I chose this theme because this episode, Mary's story is surprisingly connected to my story. And this story I'm going to share is like, I feel like it's not even a story. It's more like an experience. And it doesn't have an ending because it's kind of ongoing. But anyway, I had, my dad passed away kind of unexpectedly many years ago. But throughout the years, and I feel like even more so in the last few years, I will have dreams where he comes back and he is like in his spot on the couch, or he is in the house or whatever. And sometimes they're very just like, how was your day? Congenial, how's it going kind of things. But more often, it's distressing. And it's distressing because he's like, where's all my stuff? And like, where am I supposed to sleep? And what has happened? And these can be really distressing dreams. And I've talked to my therapist about it and just some different things. And I have also unresolved feelings about kind of the afterlife. Like, my dad didn't really believe that anything happened to you. That was his point of view. And then I come up from a faith tradition that believes in an afterlife. And I want to be able to hold both of these things and have a mind that's flexible enough to kind of hold both of them. So anywho, I've tried some things to be a little bit more like Mary. And it's weird that these are all in like a dream state, because in my dream, I have to be assertive like Mary, right? And like have a boundary. Like, Dad, I hate to break it to you, but you know, you died and I had to get rid of your stuff. Or like, you actually don't live here anymore. And that can be a really distressing conversation to have, even if it isn't a dream. And I don't know. I don't, like I said, it's not resolved. I just keep coming back to this, and to watch Mary and how she has that like uncomfortableness when Steed comes back, but then also how at the end, like, she has some appreciation and love in her own way for him, and like includes the two work together on his plan at the end. And it's kind of like a good resolution for the two of them at the end. So I just really liked that. And I guess that's my story. Anna, do you want to give us our 1 minute recap and remind us what happened in the episode?
Okay, Mary's enjoying her life as a widow. Steed shows up alive and he's ruining it. Ed is on the revenge, sick but doing well. In his cabin, Izzy's keeping it all together and not telling the crew. Mary is going to have an art show. Steed learns about Doug, Mary's painting instructor, and learns that Mary's going to keep the name Widow Bonnet. His kids are confused and pretty unhappy to see him. Lucius finds Ed in the pillow fort and helps him work on his song lyrics. Steve finds out he's painted out of the picture of him and his family. Olawande finds out Jim is back and they hook up. Let's see. Mary finds out a solution for her Steve problem, which is that murder is a natural cause. Ed wants to have a talent show and he's cool with people calling him Ed. Izzy threatens Ed. Steve threatens Doug. Ed tries to kill Lucius. Mary tries to kill Steed. Steed teams up with Doug and Mary to fake his own death. Ed cuts off Izzy's toes, destroys Steed's stuff, abandons Steed's crew, and recruits Jim and Frenchie. Steed finds his crew and Ed finds a new...
That was good.
Ed finds a new purpose. Sorry. I've had it to a minute. I guess it took longer than I thought. Anyway.
Oh, that was so well done. I couldn't even say anything. It was just, yeah. Mwah. What did you ladies see in the episode for death?
If I could, mine is, as you were talking about your story, I wrote down basically one note because I just got stuck on this thing. But just when you started talking, I'm like, oh my gosh, my head is so in the same space. As the episode gets started, I realized that I wasn't quite sure how I want to think about death in general. And you could definitely make a drinking game out of this week's episode with the word death, as we're talking about like what they're working up to. But the thing that immediately struck me were multiple people coming back from quote unquote death. And I was really struck by Blackbeard, right? I think the assumption, he's gone. And so it's a type of death, right? And then he comes back and he's different. And then how are people received when they come back from the dead, right? And so he's received and he comes on just as normal. And everybody's like, yep, we'll just start what we're doing, go back. Jim comes back, I think, from the type of death, right? Because Olawande knew where Jim went, but it was a welcoming back. And so in my mind, I aligned all of these with coming back from the dead kind of thing. And so I just love that because that was also like a welcoming but different kind, more warm, right? Blackbeard coming back is we'll just get back to business and as things as they were, and then Jim coming back from death is just this very warm, right, loving moment between Jim and Olawande, which I love, and then of course like Steve coming back from the dead. And so that was just something I really enjoyed thinking about, and then thinking about your story. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's exactly the same thing. Like, what is it like when you come back and things have either they keep moving along, or do they reset to you, right? Are you the center of the world, or is there like a new version now that you're back? So that was what struck me immediately about death here. Beyond, like I said, I could make a drinking game out of this week's episode, but just that idea of people coming back from the dead I just saw as this theme, and it was very interesting.
I think Steed comes back to his life, quote unquote, with Mary and the kids. And he has a reverse, it's a wonderful life. Like, look, George, everyone is better off without you. And Steed takes that and says, oh, okay. And accepts it with a lot of grace. He is a little bit snarky and he has some, not massive aggression, passive aggression. But he is able to get to this point of real grace in saying oh, these people are okay if I'm dead. I can go do the things that mean freedom to me and that mean life to me, and they're going to be fine and have a good life. I don't know that that's really the way anything would ever work. I don't know that these kids are going to grow out without, and poor Lewis, he doesn't even know who this dude is. And now he comes in and he's going to pretend he's dead again. But
it makes me think about Lucius's comment to Ed when he asks, what if it's not a death? What if life just begins again? And that makes me think, to your comment, and then what Victoria was talking about, and then, Alexis's story of, death is scary. It's part of the life cycle of everything. But when I was teaching, what I would really try and teach my kids, because we covered the life cycle, that was what we talked a lot about for science, was that, death is the beginning of a new cycle. So if you're looking at anything, yes, death is really hard, but it doesn't mean stop. It just means you're starting something brand new. And so death in and of itself can be really fruitful for this new process that's about to start, whatever that can mean. And I think I see examples of that where Steve's leaving, and then there's all of this growth that happens in his family. And I think that's very different from Ed's experience of trying to work out his relationship to death. I think the song is really interesting, or the song lyrics are really interesting, where he's talking with Lucius and it's about holding on, like hold on, hold on, hold on. And then Lucius makes this comment. And then when Ed sings his song, it's all about like, let go, just let go, let it all go, because life is death and it's going to be this hard, sad, like life is a hard, sad death. Like that's where he ends up. And so it seems like it's this death that more embodies the Kraken, which he names like, I am the Kraken. And I looked up like exactly what is the Kraken. And the whole point about the Kraken was, in the way of the mythology evolved, was it's about pulling things down. So like these tentacles are coming up and it's like pulling things down into the depths of the ocean. And there isn't this possibility of like regeneration in the same way. So anyway, those are all my random thoughts, but this is a really compelling episode for this theme. I just feel like there's so many things you could talk about, but those were some of the things that struck me.
I really like the new with death being like opening up a new cycle and everything. And we really saw that kind of happening between like with this episode, like how how they like to really have a parallel kind of thing within like some of these episodes. We saw that in this one where like we have when I think about death, like we have the end of the relationship between Steed and Mary, finally, kind of like them coming together of like, let's do this. Let's pretend you're dead. Let's pretend you're going to get killed and everything and finally resolve. And they have a good resolution. And then on the other half, like we have the end of Edward, basically. And it's such a bad, bad thing and all that stuff. And it's like, it's kind of interesting to see Steed coming to like this person that he's finally accepting who he is. And then on the other half, Ed we have Ed reverting backwards and everything, becoming the villain that everyone views him as. So those were my thoughts. I really like the new cycle of like, sometimes when it comes to death, like especially in this episode, we see like sometimes when it comes to an end, some like new things, good things can happen. Other times, sometimes can really affect people negatively in some way.
Yeah, for sure. That's a really good point.
And kind of this like death and resurrection theme of like coming back. I feel like the scene where like Izzy recreates Blackbeard, but worse than ever before. And it reminds me, like Katie has taught me, maybe you could say it better than me, about like depressive events and episodes. Would you say more about that?
I learn a lot about this because I've experienced it. But when you have depressive episodes, each depressive episode kind of sets a new trench that you can fall into. So I think of it as grooves on a record. Okay. And apparently back when you had records, you could, if you played the song over and over, it could carve like a deeper groove, right? So each depressive episode you have tends to get deeper. So if you think of it, that you're just like going along, and then something where before you would go into a little bit of a depression, now your brain waves, your neurological, I'm not a scientist or neurologist, but your brain pathways it's easier for you to slip into that deeper groove now than it ever was before. So every single time you have a depressive episode, you can get more depressed in a quicker way. And you just have to really learn to be mindful and have strategies to get out of it, or you live in a pillow fort. Yeah. And that's what happens. It just gets a darker pillow fort every time. So I don't think I said that well, but
No, that was it. Because I was looking like, yes, death, we see it a lot, but I was also looking at grief and just these different stages of grief. And we see probably the best example is Ed going through these different phases, and he goes through a depression and he has a little bit of acceptance. Like there's just some different things that we see from him. So thank you for sharing that.
well, it's to me, it's a really, some people will say, like, if you're a person that struggles with depression, I think one of the comments that sometimes you'll face is that people will be like, that's morbid. And if you struggle from depression, it's not morbid. You're just wired to kind of think that way. And the longer you live, the more tangible those thoughts become, the quicker they are, right? And it's not a bad thing or a dark thing. It's just how your brain is wired. And it's helped me, this episode really helped me think about it. There's a Killer's song, and Brandon Flowers in it says, "We're all gonna die." Like, kind of, he's not screaming it or angry. It's just like a declaration. And that's one thing that we know is really true, right? That we're all going to die. So, because I have this ability to have a lot of life and death thoughts on a frequent basis in my brain wiring, it makes me think, how are we treating people while we're alive? Like, what kind of life are we living? And for me, human connection is really important. And having people told that they're loved and cared about and treated that way is really important, because we're all going to die. So what matters to me is, how am I treating people while I'm alive? And Izzy thinks that that should be something very different than what Ed thinks. So the Kraken is reborn.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Katie. I think I didn't know that. I didn't, I think I would go back now and watch this episode with that, just thinking about that frame of the Ed and Izzy relationship specifically, of how Ed is trying to experience his grief or loss in a specific way. That Izzy is not isolating him, but Ed's kind of, I'm going to be in this cabin in my pillow fort, and Izzy's like, oh, he's sick, and that's the story we're telling the crew. And Frenchie questions it. He's like, he's sick, but he's fine, and he's like, yeah, sure, that's fine. And so he doesn't really want to go into it. He pulls Lucius in, but then tells him, like, swears him, you can't tell anyone what's going on. You can't tell him that Ed's kind of experiencing these things. And then Lucius shows up in this really lovely scene when he goes into the pillow fort, and he's like, okay, so I'm just, again, like, Lucius is really good about holding space for people in their experience. And that Ed then, in expressing those feelings, wants to share it and wants to talk about it and wants to kind of let people know where he's at. And the crew seems like they're really open to that idea of, like, yeah, we should all just be able to express ourselves and have this connection in whatever we're feeling. I love how Buttons says, like, whatever, like, my genius won't be translated into human language. And it's like, that's amazing. Let's go. Like, this is wonderful. And then you get the following scene with Izzy and Ed, where Izzy, again, like, awakens the Kraken deliberately. And then everything that kind of comes after it, and then kind of leads into season 2. So again, there's so many thoughts there. I don't really know what to do with it all, but I like using that as a way to kind of have an entry point into maybe the experiences of all of those people around, these specific things that are happening on the Revenge.
I liked that part with Izzy talking about, like, oh, he's under the weather. It felt like that's what we might tell someone if someone was dying slowly. And it just reminded me, like, he's kind of like dying of grief, and some deaths are going to happen slowly and be really painful to be around, and some deaths happen really fast. When I think about the grief connection, that we see that grief is always eased by others. Mary has her group of widows. Ed reaches out for Lucius. It's like healed through community and others.
Yeah, that made me think of I looked up the etymology of death, and what struck me was it was defined as a process, an act, or a condition of dying. And so I thought about the difference between those things, where an act is a single event, a process is several events or several steps in sequence, and then a condition is, a particular state that, you know, you're subjected to because of a process. Um, and I wasn't really sure what to do with that when I was watching it, but now I have this conversation to kind of help me think through again, like where can you see it as a singular event, when can you see it as a process, and then when you can see it as like this underlying thing that has maybe been there and will be there for a while.
I didn't mean to have all of my themes be tarot cards, but this one is also a tarot card. And I appreciate that this one has multiple meanings, and it can be just the end of a cycle, a change. So one example I saw that might be a fast change, and it's certainly the end of a relationship or the dynamics of a relationship, is Alawande and Jim. Like they have a moment where that old relationship has died and they have a new dynamic. And so that can be a fast, positive death.
I wanted to say at this point because I really agree with you, Alexis, about how like when dealing with death and everything, how it's really important for community wise. On a personal note, I know when my brother passed away abruptly, uh I think I can really relate. I think it was really interesting to see like so the disappearance of Steed and his death went and how Mary dealt with it and had like her widow group and everyone. She's obviously a better person now. And then we have on the other hand where Ed, he doesn't really have that strong like support group to kind of deal with like Steed being gone. And then he has like Izzy kind of like grinding in his ear about how like, you know, like it's definitely a more of an unhealthy way of having him deal with stuff, and he's become back to the Kraken and everything. And I kind of thought about how like when my brother passed away and everything, I know what really helped me get through it was definitely being around like you guys and Ben and stuff was definitely a much more helped me heal through it. And I remember like being with like my family and like dealing with the friends that my brother had and stuff was definitely like if I was going to have to deal with those people, like not my family but the my brother's friends and everything constantly, I think I would have had a much more harder time going through everything that I was going through at that time, and like probably been more angry than accepting.
Yeah, I know there's not always a whole lot that the Christian denominations will agree on, but mourning with those that mourn is like a core Christian value that is heartwarming. Yeah, because that's how we're going to heal forward.
Yeah, I think one of the things when we were looking at this episode, that at first I just kept thinking death as meaning like mortality, like the end of your life. But the more you look at it, I did think a lot about just like having depression is not a mental death or a spiritual death, right? But it's certainly like if you're a person who struggled with depression, I think it's fair to say that you're going to be able to mark these depressive episodes. And it is like a start again from it. And I think that the series handles a lot of really touchy personal issues that are often taboo around ethnicity and gender and race and classism. And I really appreciate the way that they've handled, I think, mental health here in this way of us stigmatizing it and saying like, oh, they're feeling sick. Oh, they're feeling under the weather. Like, no, you can't get out of your blanket for it. And it's not like a just get up and get over it. He's like in a dark depression. And I do think it's beautiful the way that Lucius helps him grieve that. And he's reborn as Ed. He comes out and he's Ed and he has a thriving for life again. And that quickly ends, much like his Zen period at the work camp, right? But then I also, this is not a really special thought, but I just kept thinking, like, where are we seeing like personification of death? Like, you know, death came knocking at their door or whatever. And I thought it was really interesting because the death people I saw were in community with one another. There wasn't like one Grim Reaper. It was like the widows are all a community and they're all like signifying death. And then Izzy and Blackbeard are together, right? At first, it's just Izzy wearing his all black garb, but then Ed too. And it's kind of like now we know in season two, like the whole ship is all black. Like I'm the devil and these are my children. Like it's death in a dark, dark way. So I just liked looking for different versions of death and different ways of seeing like spiritual death. You know, this beautiful idea that Lucia shares that, you know, what if death doesn't mean like you're not going to live anymore? What if it just means your life begins again in a different way? Even if that way's not a good way, it can just begin again.
That's interesting. That makes me think, because there's a couple of things you said, and as I'm kind of putting all this together, one of the things that really struck me was that scene between Izzy and Ed when he pushes him and we see Blackbeard emerge. Taika's performance is phenomenal because you see the change in his face from when he's Ed and then Izzy provokes him and then he becomes Blackbeard. And in my opinion, as Izzy turns his back and then leaves Ed in the room, Ed returns. You see Ed's face again. And so, so that like, so it's not like one and done. There's this tension. There's this tension between what's going on in Ed. And then it made me, and then as I was like kind of playing that thought as you were just talking, Katie, then I think about what you were just talking about, the grooves of the depressiveness, because we actually see that in the episode as you see him in the pillow fort. And I would say then he kind of like, you could say maybe comes out of the groove a little bit, right? As the Kraken, and that's interesting too, to think about now, because the Kraken pulls you down. For this, the Kraken actually pulls him out of the groove, but then still down, right? And so there's a lot of tension between what's going on for Ed and Blackbeard's journey. And I would say we know it's not done because then we get that scene with him in the room by himself, sobbing. He's sobbing, which now to your point, now I think that groove is even deeper than the one he was in when he was in the pillow fort, right? And so, and as we see like the darkness, right? And then in a different type of groove, I think we do the same thing with what you're talking about with the Kraken as well. Because the Kraken is a form of grief and death and depression as well. Because that represents this whole thing with his dad, right? And there's a whole other, this part of him that he hasn't reconciled. And so we see those grooves get deeper as he comes in and out of these different grooves and the playing with them, because we see Blackbeard, which we had heard about before, but as the viewer, we hadn't seen this before. And so that's interesting too, as I'm talking, I've been playing with this and Ed's journey and Taika's performance, because it's not just what he's wearing. I couldn't believe the way his face changed. And so we get to see him, right? Because then what do we see him do? We see him go into the Kraken groove and do something horrible, and then immediately goes into the depressive groove and he's sobbing uncontrollably in this room that he just emptied out, right? To try and get rid of Steed. And so, which maybe that's what that represents too, right? That tension between he's trying to push Steed out and be Blackbeard, and then a deeper, darker version of Blackbeard, and then also like grieving this. And that is like, talk about depressing. He's so lost in so many ways, and you really feel that not only with the writing and what's being depicted, but Taika's performance just really reinforces all of what's going on with his struggles.
And the music. We have to add the music. There are 3 episodes of bangers that they just like play them so well. And that avalanche comes in and you're like, yes, this is the darkness of the soul. Thank you. Was that Leonard Cohen? I don't know. But the music, it's just, what did Alexis talks about this? Like cinema is the most pure art form because it can engage all of these senses in a way that is really immersive.
Yeah, and I think along with that, like putting all these pieces together, like this episode's, there's so much here, and I love how like all these new discoveries just by listening to you all talk. But thinking about before that moment where we're talking about the tension between the handkerchief and then the painting, because the handkerchief we've seen before. Ed uses it to comfort himself when the French officer or whatever is like insulting him. He goes to Steed's room and he's kind of like holding it, and you understand this is really important because of his history with it and everything. And then we have a moment again with it with Steed. And then we have this moment at the end of towards the end of this episode where he's thinking about that moment in the moonlight with Steed holding onto the handkerchief and then lets it go. And I agree, like his face is so interesting because there's all these things that he could possibly be thinking. And then it leads right into this moment where he pushes Lucius off the ship. And it's hard for me to determine, like, why is he doing that? Is he doing it because he can? Is he doing it because Lucius saw this expression of his when he was in the pillow fort? And that's what I think it is. I think it's because Lucius saw the vulnerability and he's like, okay, get rid of this. And Ed thinks he killed Lucius. I mean, Ed thinks like, and then he tells Izzy like he's dead. And so it seems like, again, like this trying to remove those things that were maybe helping when he was getting into these grooves. The handkerchief was there, like talking to someone was there, like, Evelyn had said, and he's kind of like distancing himself from these opportunities to maybe find support. And then he clears out all of Steed's stuff. And then Izzy says that Blackbeard wants no trace of Steed's old dross, like his rubbish. And in Izzy's mind, that's true, I believe. But then you find out that he didn't get rid of everything. Like the painting is still there. And the painting is something that's really significantly important to Steed. Ed knows the story behind it. And they had this moment where they were the lighthouse together. And now he's like, I'm the Kraken. So there's all these layers to it. And I'm not quite sure what to do with it. But it's extremely well written. It's extremely well acted. And then, like you're saying, like the costuming, the music, like everything else, the cinematography is combining to create all these pieces that I'm still trying to unwrap. And I think that's sort of the point. Like you can find all these different layers within this experience, and you can just keep watching it again and again and find more. And your own experience is going to help color, how you interpret what's happening with these characters.
Yeah, that's just what I was going to say, is that we bring so much of ourselves to our interpretation of it.
I was going to say, I feel like Ed wanted, I think Lucius was the one who was supposed to help him out of those grooves. Like he was gonna be the positive, like experience that will help Ed kind of heal through this breakup. And I think Ed, because like when it comes to breaks, I feel like there could like some people really handle it all differently, and depending, I guess, how the relationship went and stuff. And some people can like really wants to hold on to the anger and the like frustration and all that stuff. I think Ed ended up choosing, because it seems like Ed came to a point of like choosing what he wanted to do and stuff. And so he wanted to kind of choose the negativity. He chose to keep some things that will remind him like this like sadness. He chose to toss Lucius, who could help him actually feel better, because we saw it was Lucius, like his conversation with Lucius was what brought Ed back out and sing this song and like feelings and everything. And so he's just choosing to be like angry and frustrated and just be in this like really just stay in the groove. That negativity is how I kind of viewed it.
Yeah, I think there are these decision points. There are multiple decision points in what's happening with him. And I don't know if that's something that he actually has that many choices. But the choices he does make absolutely are kind of creating this other outcome that's going to be ultimately causing him more pain, because he's just isolating himself more and more. I mean, even though Izzy is excited Blackbeard's back, what Blackbeard's doing is actually isolating himself more and more from even Izzy, who was like his stalwart, who was his right hand. And so I think there's this destruction of that relationship that's already beginning, and I don't think Izzy understands that yet. He doesn't recognize that for what it is. But to your point, Evelyn, that there's this moment where Blackbeard says, he's kind of doing all these things like getting rid of the crew and everything, and he says, on to the next. And my question is like, next what? Like, what does he mean by that? I mean, I know what happens in season 2, but I'm like, what does he mean in that moment? And it's really perplexing because, again, how the character that you've seen before, and then like the tenderness and the the desire to become Ed has now been subverted by Blackbird, and we're getting to see like Blackbird and who Blackbird is. And so it is terrifying in the performance, because like this guy really seems like he could be capable of anything, because these decision points he's making just kind of lead him further and further along this path. But again, they're a reflection, I think, of his pain, and maybe he feels like he doesn't have any other choice. I don't know.
He's really numbed himself to everything, right? And like you see the Ed we meet, or the Blackbeard, I guess, we meet at the beginning of the season is a little Peter Panish, like mischievous, bored, looking for an adventure, looking for something different. And then I feel like it's the first episode we meet him, which is what, episode 2 or 3? Anyway, he says like, oh, death, we haven't tried that. Like that would be an interesting adventure kind of thing. And it went from this, like, I'm having a difficult time and I'm struggling, to like, I really struggled and I just want to die, which I think to me, that's what the pillow fort. I really relate to that experience. Like, this is just where I'm at. Like, you can record my music. I don't know. I think if you've been there, you've had those moments where you're like, don't people know to not leave me alone right now? Like those really bad times. And then he emerges from it. And I think that I like our conversation, because I really think Lucius does represent, the whole crew is very supportive of him, being this different person, but Lucius does represent of, I'm someone who can help you, and I'll hold the space for you to heal. And that's a hard road. That's going to require some growth. And Izzy's just helps him sink back in, and he numbs himself to everything. There is this very flat affect on his face that you're like, yeah, this character is going to let you know that they're not the one to mess with, and you're not going to have time to realize what's happening.
Yeah, which is why I think it's so interesting, his choice to abandon Steed's crew and not kill them, or not let Izzy kill them. Which again, I agree, like the change, and all of a sudden, like, oh, this is who Blackbeard is, and like he's scary. But then again, there's still this, I don't know, again, there's this tension, I think, which Victoria talked about. Like there's this tension of these feelings that are maybe underneath, or that are being numbed out, that are still present. That's the thing. Like they're not gone, but there's definitely a fighting it. But then also too, what's Blackbeard's end game here? And I don't know if he has one. Again, is the end game eventually death? Or is it eventually just sinking deeper and deeper? Or is it something, again, like you're even aware of, or you're just going moment by moment? I don't know.
When season 1 ended, I've really liked Taika Waititi. I love Flight of the Conchords, and that's how I originally knew about him. So this is a long time of me like, this is a cool kid, and this is an actor I like, and like, oh, look at this, and work that he's done that I really like. But I'll tell you, and Alexis can agree, that when season 1 ended, I was like, if Lucius is dead, I am not watching anymore. I am done. Because Lucius, that was the intention, was to kill him. Everybody else, it was to like let them kill themselves or die of starvation or whatever, probably dehydration first, but he wanted Lucius to die. And like, we all love Lucius, but if we're going to be honest, he doesn't seem like a survivor. He's not like this scrappy guy who's like, I'm going to fight my way out. He's like, I'm going to talk myself out of doing chores. So
I had a thought a little while ago, and I hope I don't regress our conversation, because I like some of our directions here. But I was thinking about the scarf and the painting, and I feel like a third really important tangible object is the orange. I saw, like, we bring so much of ourselves to it. So when I saw like the scarf thing, like that was something that originally belonged to Ed. So I feel like when he's getting rid of it, he is really getting rid of that Ed side of himself. Like, I can't be that person. Just like my mom said, I'll never be that person. But I think he kept the painting because that represents Steed. And it's almost like it's hanging above me. It's like watching me. It's seeing this. And then I think it's interesting that Steed also has a tangible object, that he has dinner and he's talking to the orange, right? It's something that he's carrying, and this is a grief informed thing. Like having a tangible object can help with grief, or it's something. I love that it turns into a connection with his daughter, that's going to be something that she's going to have this tangible connection to her dad, even when he's gone. So I don't know what more to say, but that's a thought I had.
I wanted to say poor Alma, because obviously she was pretty pissed about him leaving. And then him coming back, and it's all like, oh. But then it was very cute of their little conversation when they were ripping up the fabric. Like, she's kind of like, okay. And then I want to keep a piece of you, so here you go. I want half of this. Lewis is just going to keep thinking Doug's hurting his dad. He's fine.
Yeah, I think that it's great to parallel the experience of Steed and his family and then the orange with Ed and the crew, because it just, when you were talking, it brought to mind that, you have this, everything's come to a head where Mary's like, okay, got to get rid of this guy for real. But then she's also too like, I want to get over tonight. Like, I don't want to wake up the kids. Like, she's thought it out and she's great. But he gets to this point where they're talking to each other and he said, we can't seem to stop hurting each other. And then he's like, I don't fit here anymore. Like, this isn't working. They really talk to each other and dissolve the relationship and say, we're just really causing pain to each other, because Steve is not having a good time when he's back to his family. He's trying to help, but again, like, he's having some tough experiences. He's not handling it well. He's definitely being super snarky. But I do like that the resolution between the two of them comes from the honesty of how they're both feeling, and that, like, we're trying to force something to happen that isn't going to, it's just not working. We have different paths, different things that we want. And that's when they're actually able to talk about the people that both of them are in love with, and talk about what love should be and what love could be. And then, Steed is able to take that moment and then figure out a way to take care of his family, resolve things, and make sure, Mary's set and has her life that she wants. And then he can go have his life that he wants. And again, I think it's really interesting because that comes, obviously, like you're saying, from the connection, and that being able to honestly say, this isn't working. Comparing that to Izzy and Ed, where Izzy's like, I don't even know who you are. Like, they should have killed you. Like, I don't, this isn't the Blackbeard I work for. And again, like, comparing those two conversations, and just seeing like the results of both of those approaches. And that really comes from, I think, being able to let go, going back to this death theme of like being able to let go of what you thought the person was, what you thought the expectation was that you were supposed to, meet by agreeing to this thing, that like, yeah, it's time to change. Like, this is over. This is done, whatever this is. And let's think about what can come next. Anyway, those are the thoughts that came when you're kind of really comparing Steed's journey in all of this, and how, yeah, it's just, maybe sometimes the environment, the things that you have around you can also help determine, like how you react when those grooves happen, and how those, things, again, in a sequence, in a process, kind of one leads to another. Like, there are things that can interrupt that and things that can help you with that. But then also too, you can turn your back on those things and say, like, I absolutely don't want that. Or I don't want that right now. Like, now isn't the time for that, in order for me to be able to fully process. Anyway, this is all to say grief's very complicated and there's a lot of ways to go about it.
I saw another parallel reminding me of what you said, that I feel like both Steed and Ed were able to choose their death, like metaphorically, but like Steed chose the manner of his disappearance death. And I love that he ends up totally liberated. You could see him on the shore. He has freedom. There's possibility. It's full of hope. It's wonderful. And then Ed chooses a kind of death too, and becomes Blackbeard. He is the Kraken. He's like put away the Ed there. And I don't know if he feels the same liberation. I don't know. Maybe that's like on to the next. That's his, like, that phase is gone. And, that could be his liberation. But I thought there were a few characters that I saw. Yeah, death is liberation. married certainly felt liberated.
And what a beautiful send off Mary gave. Like, oh, I know that like Steve did his muckery, right? To make it a death, like he is not coming back. But then Mary was able to give a really honest and beautiful eulogy. Like Steve was actually suffering. He was really ill. So this is probably better for him. And even though he could be really quite annoying and we didn't really like him all the time, he was a lovely man. And, like she knows that he's still alive physically, but that idea of, I don't know, Alexis, but your dad's phrase was like, we're all just a fart in the wind. Like if that's really what's happening, like long may he roam, like let that scent linger, you know, go out there. And yeah, I just liked the long may he roam. I thought it was a really lovely eulogy.
Yeah, I think it's an important point that sometimes maybe the being able to let go is not you, it's the people around you not being able to release you from whatever their expectation or story or connection is to you. And so I really like that, focusing on that Mary releasing Steed, because then that makes me think of the end of season 2 where Ed gets released. And that's when freedom comes. Like you can do a lot of things on your own, but it also too, if we're saying that the relationships are so vitally important to, everyone's experience, then it also is, is the other person able to kind of let you go, to say goodbye, to like let whatever it is come to an end and close so you can move on. Yeah, it's definitely complicated, but yeah, I like that, thinking about Mary's part in letting Steve have this new life. Cause yeah, he looks amazing. He looks incredible and he's ready to go, get Ed back. And we'll see how that goes. All right, that is it for episode 10, part 1. If you would like to listen to our sacred reading practice, which this week is Lectio Divina, and our blessings, you can find those on episode 10, part 2.